The Maryland Attorney General's office declining to file charges against the Baltimore County police officer involved in an incident where a man died. Hi everyone, I'm Jason Newton. Welcome to 11 TV Hill. Deadly encounters involving police across Maryland have been at the forefront recently. Last week we learned the AG's office will not prosecute the officer for the death of a man in Gwynn-Oak. This was back on February the 16th when the Baltimore County police officer found 56-year-old Samuel Brown asleep in his car. During that exchange, the officer hit Brown in the face, causing him to fall and then to hit his head. He died days later. The AG's office concluded that there was no evidence that shows the officer intended to kill him. Now, just hours before that announcement, the ACLU published a report detailing police killings in the state. Between 2015 and 2023, 143 people died following accounts with police. The report says no officers were convicted in any of those cases. And joining me now today is Sonia Kumar with the ACLU. And part of this whole thing, first, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Part of this, I think you said, this isn't to cast blame on police, but to figure out how more people can leave encounters alive.
Exactly.
Correct? Walk me through
exactly
that thinking.
Well, I think, so we have 143 people who died in police encounters. There are some striking patterns that we identified in the analysis. One is that in nearly half the cases, the person was experiencing some kind of medical or mental health crisis, right? In at least 24 cases, somebody had called 911 specifically seeking help for the person who ended up dying in the encounter. And I think that part of what we're really urging here is sort of like, okay, our legal system, and there's a whole lot of reasons why this happens.
Sure.
Our legal system looks at whether a particular officer's actions in the moment were justified, but no one is tasked or responsible for asking, what could we have done differently? What could we have done that would have saved this person's life? And so, whether the question is, whether the officer acted sort of entirely appropriately and within policy or with extraordinary violence that sort of shocked the conscience, the question we ask is always the same. So what can we learn from what happened and what could we do differently?
I know in Baltimore City, with their whole violence reduction strategy, community is a big thing. Finding a spot where both the police and folks who live in the area can find a sort of family between the two. Is that something that you think would change some of these numbers?
I think absolutely. I think a huge part of this is sort of the attitudes and the approach. And are we going into this with the assumption that everybody's in danger and at immediate risk of harm, or is there an opportunity to sort of build trust and de-escalate, right? That's a huge part of de-escalation, is that trust and that sense of safety. And I think that is also, the question goes to also how we're equipping officers and who we're sending into these moments. And does it always need to be armed police officers? I think that's a huge question that has been asked again and again over the years by families who've lost loved ones in these kinds of encounters.
If your numbers show that mental health is a huge issue in some of these encounters, do you think there's enough training that happens right now? Or like you said, that I think Baltimore City does a plan where not always an armed officer comes out. It might be someone who's skilled in that back and forth. How does that play?
I think that's a really important aspect of the solution. So, there's no one size fits all, of course. But I think absolutely, I think in a lot of, and there's been a lot of studies about this, and there are many opportunities to sort of ask both, training for officers who are going to be sent into situations, but then also stepping back and asking, do we need to send officers, or is it a special unit? And then ensuring that we're adequately funding and resourcing and ensuring quality improvement when we do have, like crisis response units that are also part of the response.
What else raised eyebrows for you as those numbers begin to come back?
I think, it's not surprising, still horrifying that there were huge racial disparities in who dies in police encounters in Maryland. Black Marylanders were 3 times as likely as their white counterparts to die in a police encounter. 90% of those 21 and under who died were Black or Latina. And similarly, 83% of those who were unarmed and were not allowed to have a weapon of any kind were Black or Latina. And so I think, there are a lot of our hope is really that this is an opportunity for many of us to ask sort of what we could be doing differently. And as you said, it's not about faulting any particular individual officer or agency, but recognizing sort of structurally the ways in which we are setting ourselves up to allow this to continue. And so there are three kind of, contributing factors that we see. One is that sort of, unlike other deaths in the immediate aftermath of an encounter, fairly unfairly, police agencies leap into damage control, right? And so then the immediate narrative becomes blaming the victim, describing how they were a threat, rather than, which is sort of an additional burden that the families bear. Now they're finding themselves needing to defend and humanize the loved one who's died in the encounter. Sure. And then similarly, the Maryland Medical Examiner over the years has really both deferred to police narratives, but also failed to identify sort of a causal link between police conduct and death, sure. which has sort of created this impression that there is nothing that we could do differently, that there's no relationship between what police did and whether the person died. And ultimately, a lot of this comes back to, again and again, this idea that our systems currently look at whether an individual officer's actions were justified, right? That's a very different question and justified under the law in a legal system that doesn't want to second guess what police officers are doing and making their judgment calls in the moment. And that's very different than asking, if we really look at this through the lens of like, how could we have saved this life? What could we have done differently? And from from before the officer shows
sure.
up through the end of the encounter.
Is there a place where an everyday person can take a look at the report for themselves, thumb through, and
yes,
where should they go to do that?
They should go to the ACLU of Maryland website.
Okay.
And we have both a report and a database where people can look up for themselves sort of all of the individual encounters relating to the report.
Excellent. Sonia, thank you for coming by.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you. Yep.